What's going on, everybody? My name is Lee. Welcome to my channel. If you're new here, I'm a biblical expositor and counselor, and my passion in life is to co-labor with Jesus to set captives free and to partner with the Holy Spirit to help them stay free. So on this channel, we talk about a wide range of things, everything from mental, emotional, relational health to end times, prophecy, discipleship, spiritual formation. We do podcast style episodes, hoping to do an increase on those here in the near future. But we also talk about reactions and covers to different pop culture type things that are relevant, pressing issues that I think are important to talk about and discuss. And so today we are doing just that, a reaction covering a particular video involving Daily Wire and Jordan Peterson. So we'll jump into that in just a minute. But if you're new here, glad you're here. Hope you'll stick around. And if you're a returning viewer, glad to see you. Hope you'll hit the like button and share this video if it adds any value to you. So without further ado, we're talking today a little bit about the importance of Jesus's celibacy. Whoa, what's that about? Not sure. Well, it's actually an important issue dealing with Jesus's celibacy or not. In this video, they present a question that I think is pretty important, but when you first hear it, you may step back and think, actually, why is that important? And so we're going to take a look at that. And at the end of the video, there's a question presented that I think is probably, I'm actually more excited to talk about that than the celibacy issue, which oddly enough is what the video was centered on. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into this, shall we?
I'm prefacing it only because it's always the sensitive issue of the Jews not recognizing Jesus as the Messiah and the Son of God and so on. But I have always felt that one of the obstacles to the Jews at the time accepting Jesus was that he was a bachelor. Jews have no figures of heroic bachelors. And it's just a provocative, interesting thought for your consideration. That's all I'm throwing it out there. I don't know any of the rabbis of the Talmud who were bachelors. None of the great Jews from Moses on.
Jeremiah is celibate, isn't he?
Well, he is, isn't he?
He takes a vow of celibacy.
He never ended up marrying. Is that correct?
If my memory serves me right, Jeremiah was celibate. The prophet, he was commanded by God not to marry or have children, I believe, if my memory serves me right.
Well, I think so. I'd have to look at it again, but I think he takes a vow of celibacy.
Okay, it's exceedingly rare.
But it's rare,
and it's
quite
certainly
right,
not the Jewish ideal. So
But,
I just
but the image is that this is what happens, this is the madness of the situation, is that just like Mary is a virgin, Christ's virginity or his celibacy is so that he becomes the bridegroom.
The bridegroom of the
And the actual word that's used is very striking.
the bridegroom of
The world.
of the world,
Yeah.
of creation.
Right. I mean, he addresses her gune, woman, which can also mean wife in the Greek, but not as mother or mum. You know, it sets up the archetype. It sets up the invitation to think of her as a...
I mean, the kind of hieros gamos, that there's some sort of
Yeah.
sacred marriage of...
Yeah.
People all my life have asked me about priestly celibacy. They're fascinated by it, right? And you know, it's not something that's necessary in the priesthood. There have been for a long time priests weren't celibate. And there are different arguments we can make. I've always found that the most convincing one is Jesus was celibate. And the priest is meant to be an alter Christus. And so it's the celibacy of Jesus. That's what I would point to. There are more pragmatic arguments I could use. But it's like priesthood participating in the Christic form.
Yeah, and I'd just like to say this. I think that as true as that is for the priest to say, well, Jesus was celibate, I feel like that's a cop-out answer. I mean, yes, we want to be like Christ and model after him, and so, like, it's the perfect answer, right? Yeah, but do you actually know why? Like, do you actually know why that's kind of like the quote-unquote higher path? And do you have any other, like, biblical basis for making that decision, even if you don't know the ins and outs of it? I feel like when I was in elementary school, you know, I remember, you know, I don't know, like third grade or something, like on a math test, I would just put Jesus. I was terrible at math. I'd just put Jesus in the answer because Jesus is the answer for everything, you know, and of course, that didn't fly for my math teacher. But I feel like when the priests are asked that question, what he just said, well, because Jesus was celibate, and that's their answer, it's like, well, okay, yeah, Jesus is the answer, of course, but I feel like it's a cop-out answer, and I feel like there's value to the celibate life for those who are called to it, but do you know why? I feel like that's incredibly important, and I don't know. I was just unsatisfied with that answer, even though, yes, technically, like, of course, we want to be like Christ, and that's a high calling. I get it.
And it's a deeply sexual reality that at least is presented in the story of Jesus, is that he is going to become the bridegroom for the cosmos, and the relationship between Christ and the church is presented in St. Paul especially as this erotic relationship between Christ and the followers. And so it's not a celibacy in a kind of weird prudish way. It's rather this dedication of sexuality to something higher, which then kind of manifests itself cosmically.
So this is to the Christians present. If he were married, do you think it would have taken away from his message?
Right there, that is a very interesting question to me. Okay, let's backtrack for a minute. This gentleman, I don't know any of their names other than Jordan, so maybe I should do better at that. But this guy here on the screen, he gives this explanation that is kind of weird. There's not really any practicality to it. It's very metaphoric in a sense. I get what he's trying to say in terms of like he's the bridegroom, right? And that's what his celibacy is leading him towards, is this bridegroom wedding that's going to happen, right? And in the new age. Valid, get it. Love it. Then this other gentleman proposes this question. Do you think if Jesus had married, it would have affected his message at all? I want to know what you think. Let me know in the comments below. I think it's a very important question that we wrestle with and that we ask. If Jesus had married, is there anything immoral or unethical about marriage? Well, no. So if Jesus had engaged in marriage, would it have changed anything? Now, this gentleman asks about his message. Would it have changed anything about his message? What was his message? Well, his message was the gospel of the kingdom. Man, we could go down a rabbit hole here. So his message, we could go down a rabbit hole there on the whole message idea. However, in the grand scheme of things, if Jesus had just come to be a messenger, him being married might not have been that big of a deal. But Jesus came to be much more than a messenger. Jesus came to be a sacrifice. Jesus came to accomplish a set of tasks that would lead to his Father giving him all authority over heaven, earth, and beneath the earth, as Revelation 12, I believe, describes it, where every knee will bow and every tongue will confess, in heaven, on earth, and under the earth. A marriage would have gotten in the way of that, don't you think? A marriage would have drastically impacted his mission on the earth. So would it have impacted his message on the earth? Maybe we could explore that, but it most certainly would have impacted his mission on the earth. And that's something I think the gentleman is not thinking through, because when you're coming from a perspective, and I don't know what this gentleman's perspective is he Jewish? I don't know. And so I'm not trying to misrepresent him or his beliefs here. But when you're coming at Jesus from the perspective of he was a good teacher, he had a good message, and you're not coming and approaching Jesus as the king to whom every knee will bow. That means every human leader. It means every demonic entity tormenting you. It means Satan himself and every other entity that is in our realm or another dimension, no matter how powerful it is, Jesus has authority over that because he accomplished the mission his Father gave to him. When you don't look at Jesus through that lens as the king, then this question becomes just about what it affected his message, because to them Jesus was just a really enlightened messenger. And when you don't see Jesus as king, you're missing it. Because yeah, Jesus, a cool messenger, but so is Buddha, Muhammad, Gandhi. I mean, we've had a lot of Martin Luther Jr. We've had a lot of good messengers throughout history, but Jesus is king. And when you start to bring authority into the message we're giving, that's where everything changes. Marriage would have most definitely impacted his mission. This is why Paul encourages us to, for those who are called to it and can, Paul says, I wish that you would remain as I am, referring to being single, because then you can focus on kingdom matters in this age. Because that should be the highest priority. But when you're married, then you have earthly matters to tend to, right? That's what Paul's saying. And of course, there's also this simultaneous command to be fruitful and multiply. And so the idea of marriage and multiplication, of course, is godly and the same, but there seems to be this higher calling that for those who can endure it and are called to it in this age, celibacy is a higher path that can be taken, a sense of a higher nobility, for like a sense of a higher consecration or a higher path of a consecrated life. Jesus even talks about for those who can endure it for the sake of the kingdom, they'll become eunuchs, right? Okay, and so we can kind of get a glimpse of these ideas of like there's something about the celibate life that is a higher level of consecration. It's almost like the idea of this dish being reserved for special use. It's just, there's something about it, right? And so, so Jesus, the matter of Jesus' celibacy, not so important for his message, but highly critical for his mission. Let's continue on.
I mean, it didn't happen that way, so I don't know how to answer that question.
And this is a cop-out answer. Now, to be fair, he was put on the spot. Who knows what anyone would have said in this moment to be put on the spot. But I can't stand the answers of like, it didn't happen that way, so I don't have to answer it. No, well, like, let's think about this for a minute. Let's pull this out. I think that a good answer is, I don't know how it would have affected his message, but redirect to the mission of Jesus and pull out his authority to save and to deliver and to be the king, right? Like, let's talk about that for a minute. That's when people get saved. That's when shackles break, and that's when demons flee. When you talk about the name of Jesus, and by the name, I mean his authority and his reputation.
That's fine. It may be unimaginable.
Not his message, but I think the symbolic dimension.
By the way, on behalf of the Catholic Church, I just want people watching to understand that marriage is a sacrament of your church.
Of course. Yeah.
People may not know that. They may think the only sacrament.
No, right.
It is. Okay.
But it's also related to this idea of sacrifice, which is really important. That the sacrificial element that Christianity offers is life-giving. And so we say the life of the church is based in the martyrs, right? The life of the church is based in these ascetics. So downstream from the ascetic is actually families with 10 children and like huge burgeoning community.
Of life.
And so the sacrifice is like this pointing up, which looks like it's a negation, but it ends up being a seed that fills the rest of the
highest
world up.
union.
That's right. And so that's important because it's really the way it's
understood. There's a celibacy in marriage that's
of course.
in service of life, and the celibacy in marriage is that you don't sleep with anyone else, right?
That's right.
Yeah, we say marriage is a cross.
There's another married man who says what I've said my whole life. The only difference between me and a priest is he can't have any woman, and I can't have any woman but one.
Right. All right, so let's turn to this next.
I wanted to ask Jonathan.
I don't have any comment about that. Seems kind of silly. No, celibacy is about the self-denial of sexual gratification. So if you're married, you're engaging in that. Now we're talking about celibacy is not the refraining from fornication or adultery or polygamy. It's the refraining from sexual intimacy and gratification, even with one person. So, okay. Now, this question, I think we're about to come upon it, is a is a fair question that I think I've already hit on a little bit. So we'll see if I need to wrap back around on anything.
Oh, yep,
Because
please
Jonathan,
go ahead.
you brought up a theme again, and you've done it multiple times, this idea of inversion. You've got something, here's an existing story, in the way Greg's talking about stories, right? And then it's being inverted, and Jesus is taking it and inverted. But you also speak of inversion elsewhere as something negative, right? And what's the difference between those two inversions?
So the difference in the case of Jesus is that the inversion that Jesus brings is a return. So it's basically, imagine there's a situation that brings you away from the garden, brings you away from holiness. Jesus flips it and then makes it into a return to the center. And so he's going to do that nonstop all through the story. Everything that he does, he does everything that happens in the garden, but he does it towards a return.
And the return is normatively...
He eats the fruit, he dies, he does all the things.
And the return is a normatively good thing to do.
It's a return towards the center, towards the seed, towards the meaning. Oh, yes.
And so the pejorative
Towards
inversion would be
paradise.
something...
But I don't understand. And I haven't watched the whole series here. Maybe they're trying to keep their language very literary, poetic, metaphoric. But dude, a return towards the seed? Like that, the answer there just kind of boggles me. Like, what does that mean, right? Why not just say, yeah, it's a return towards what God intended for all of humanity and creation to be in the first place, before the usurpation and the fall. That's what we're returning to. We fell from this state that God had originally designed in the garden. We fell from that, and we've gradually been getting more and more chaotic. And Jesus came to invert, and we're going back to what we fell from, but not just a restoration. It's a complete and utter overhaul. Things are also going to be upgraded simultaneously because of Jesus's sacrifice, obedience, and authority. Anyway, let's see the last few seconds.
It's a garden. Yeah.
The negative inversion would be something that takes you further away from that.
That's right. I don't know where that was.
I just wanted to get clear on, because you used both. You used these both, and I wanted to know which one was which.
Inversion in service of what is the question.
Yeah.
Okay, inversion in service of what? Yeah, so, okay. I think I made that clear. I just was like, that's such a good question that the gentleman proposed. And I don't know all of these guys' faith views, but I think you got the Catholic. I think you got maybe the gentleman who was predominantly speaking from the Christian faith. I think maybe he was an Orthodox, maybe a Jewish representation, maybe I don't know exactly what they've got around the panel there. But the gentleman there at the end with the glasses proposed a great question about the inversion. I was just not satisfied with the answer that the other gentleman gave on what's being inverted back to the seed. I think, if I recall correctly, he said something to that effect. Let me know what you think in the comments below, both about the celibacy thing, but also about the inversion thing. How do you think I handled that? And do you think there was more that could be fleshed out or pulled out there that we could consider? I think this is incredibly important for us to think about and be aware of. For one, being able to articulate properly the gospel, but also to make sound decisions in our life, but also to just be aware when we're hearing these debates and conversations and things, not to get sidetracked. For example, what I mean by the sidetracked thing, one could have said right there at the first question, do you think if Jesus had been married, it would have affected his message? And if we're not careful, we may forget all about his mission, as I went into there. And I think that's incredibly important, because someone could go off and one little seed of thinking could grow and blossom into just, you're out in the middle of no man's land right now. How did you even get here? And it started from this little seed of, well, if a seed couldn't have affected, if him being married wouldn't have affected his message, then this, and then this, and then this. And then you follow those conclusions, and all of a sudden you're just out in nowhere. You know what I mean? So anyway, I think these are important. I hope this has been interesting for you. As always, I'd love for you to like, share, subscribe, hit the notifications, leave a comment, all the things. But nevertheless, thanks so much for tuning in. I'll catch you next time.